Hello, my name is Jessica Savage, and I'm the Recreation Program Manager for the Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation, and I'm here to share with you today a little bit about creating a trail in your backyard. So when you think about developing a trail in your backyard or in your woods, often many things cross your mind. You want to create access to your land sustainably. You want to perhaps offer or invite an experience for your neighbors or your community to connect with trails on their land. And you want to think about creating a year-round way to experience your favorite recreational activities. So maybe in the summertime, you can go for a walk, and in the wintertime, you could snowshoe or ski. And trails are really a great way to do that and also offer an opportunity for you to explore your land and discover the history of it. You can see different things at different times of year if you're accessing the same place. You can discover how people have used your land in the past. Most of the land in Vermont especially has been touched by human hands over time, so you're going to find evidence of that. And exploring for creating a trail is a great way to do that. You might even discover that you're not the first person to think about putting a trail on your land. You might find old roads or old access trails on it. And then, of course, discovering the natural history of your land. How was this forest formed? How was the geology underlying the vegetation formed? And you're going to find evidence of that too. And then safe and sustainable trails, they really are a great way to accommodate all generations in your family. Trails are an inviting and warm way for people to get to know the land that their family lives on. So there's lots of different types of trails that you could think about creating on your land based on who is going to be using the trail. So is it going to be just for you or maybe your immediate family? Is it going to be for your kids or your grandkids when they're visiting, neighbors, or even the public? On private land in Vermont, we have a lot of public access. So it really dictates the way that you plan out your trail, who is going to be using the trail. And I think it's really important to think about not just right now, but 5, 10, 15, 20 years into the future, because once you've built a trail, it's going to be there for a really long time. And thinking about the changing types of people who might be using that trail is also really important. We're all going to change as we get older, and it's important to think about what we want those trails to be like for that change. And then what do you want the trail to highlight about your property? You know, is there some special feature that you'd like to check out at different times of the year, or maybe on a daily or weekly basis? Something as simple as a rock formation or a waterfall or just a special tree, something that really gives you a destination for this trail. Those are really good things to incorporate into your planning. And then maybe you're an avid mountain biker or a skier and you really want to create that experience for yourself in your backyard, or connect to neighbors who have that experience and create an expanding trail network for something that you really enjoy doing. And that's a really important thing to think about too, because of course, trails for walking are different than trails for mountain biking or skiing. They have different standards. They have different widths that you need to think about. So it's good to identify all the types of uses that you'd like to see on your trails. And then it's also just as important to think about things you should avoid with your trails. You know, maybe there's some special or sensitive place on your property you really don't want to have any human impact on, or maybe you just want to make sure that the view shed, what you can see from the trail or from your house is sort of kept separate, or you're thinking of managing for timber or removing trees at some point, and you don't want to have that impact in your trail experience or vice versa. So here's some tips for trail layout. I designed and maintained and built trails for about 13 years, and it was really always important to get back to the purpose of your trail. So why do you want this trail? Is there anyone else who wants to use it? Why would they use it? What's your motivation and sort of goal or vision for this trail? Because that sort of dictates everything else. And it's easy to get caught up in getting excited about cutting trees or vegetation or digging. But it's really important to go back to that purpose when you start laying out your trail. And then also thinking about what uses the trail will have. Again, going back to the fact that there are different standards and practices for the different types of uses that you would see on this trail. And of course, you could change your mind. You can start out and say, I really just want this to be a walking trail. But then maybe, 5 years from now, you or your children really get into mountain biking and you could redesign or repurpose that trail. But, if you already know you want to have multiple uses on that trail, you might as well start with those uses and figure out that from the beginning. And then, of course, you really have to think sustainably when it comes to trails. They do have an impact, and you want to make sure that they can be in the right place and that they are sustainable in terms of the resources that you have to give to them to keep them in a good condition. So you want to think about physical sustainability. So really put it in the right place the first time. You'll save yourself tons of money and headaches. And that takes time, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But you want to also use the right techniques for construction. There's an impact. The biggest impact to any trail building is the building of the trail. That's the moment where you have actually decided to remove vegetation, remove the ability for organic matter to exist in the place where the impact's going to be. And so you want to use the right technique for that construction. And then you also want to think about, of course, ecological sustainability, avoiding sensitive areas, and minimizing those impacts, both the construction impacts and then, of course, the fact that people are then going to be using the corridor. How can you make sure that they're doing it in a way that is compatible with the ecology of your backyard or your forest? And then thinking about stewardship is also really important. Again, who's going to take care of this trail? Is this going to be you? Is it going to be you for now? And then maybe as you get older, maybe somebody else is going to take over. What long-term maintenance is really needed to take care of this trail? And if you think about putting it in the right place and at the right slope and all that stuff that we're going to get into in a minute, the first time, hopefully your maintenance is pretty minimal. But, things happen. You're going to have to remove blowdowns and trees, branches, things like that. You're going to have to clean out any drainage structures at least once or twice a year. So, just factoring that into where you're putting your trail in the first place is really important to think about. And then at this point, I think you're ready to really get to know your land. If you don't already have a map of your property that really shows you all the different natural community types, all the different potential habitat types that you have there, looking for any rare, threatened, and endangered species that you want to avoid. And then giving any of those sensitive areas some space, and sensitive areas can range from, a vernal pool, a wetland, maybe even a stream. You want to give those places some space to keep doing what their natural function is. And at the same time, enjoy them. You can look at them. You just want to make sure that you're not going to be having an undue impact on them. And if you need assistance with any mapping efforts, there's lots of self-help type resources out there, like the Natural Resources Atlas, the Vermont Center for Geographic Information. And then, of course, you could always contact your county forester, who's always available to help with this kind of stuff. Trail layout is actually my favorite part of building a trail because you're going to be taking a lot of time to explore. You're going to be walking through your woods. And of course, you want to make sure that you have a wayfinding capacity, some way to be safe and make sure you can get back to your house if you have a lot of acres. But, it's really the funnest time in trail layout is walking your woods. And you should spend the most time on this activity because you want to find the right line. A construction friend of mine once told me that think about how long it's going to take you to build your trail and then factor in an extra 2 years for trail layout and design, which is kind of an exaggeration, but taking your time with that, it just saves headaches so many times down the line. So, and in doing that exploration, you might find that there's already some, either wildlife trails or historic roads, and you can use those if you want to, if they're in good condition, if they're not too steep or they're not too wet, or they might be places to avoid because people didn't always put trails or roads in the best places back in the day. But sometimes they can be great, and sometimes they're features that could really be something you want to highlight. So as you're laying out your trail, you really want to think about the grade of it. There's lots of resources out there that recommend specific numbers. You want to stay under 10%, which is a really good recommendation. But it's going to be site specific. I mean, the type of soil that you have, the type of vegetation that you have, the type of underlying bedrock and hydrology that's on your land is really going to determine how steep or mellow you need to make the grade of your trail. You don't want a trail to be 100% flat. It feels like that would be probably the best thing because water can't possibly hurt it. But then you end up with this cupped, really flat trail where water just gets stuck in puddles and pools. So you really do want to work with land. And then when you do find that you need to have some grade to it, you want to have side slope to your trail, which means the edge of the trail, so where the water can get off and go across the trail, needs to be greater than the slope of the trail. And then again, getting back to the idea that you're going with the terrain. So go with the flow of your terrain, create a curvilinear of your construction. So you're kind of meandering up and down and giving the water the places it wants to go off of the trail as it naturally does in your landscape. And then there will be times and places where you're just going to need a structure, like you can't avoid crossing a stream. I always recommend bridges, even for small streams, because that allows the most aquatic organism passage, and siting those structures in the right place is really important. And kind of making a list of all those things as you're going along. Some of them you're not going to find until you actually start construction because of the way that works. You're not going to discover every seep. You're not going to discover every fun thing that the Vermont landscape has to offer when it comes to trail construction until it actually happens. So, and that's, again, that gets to the sort of fun nature of trails if you like having to think on your feet. And if you really don't know where to put your trail, it's okay to ask for help. You can hire a professional trail designer, and they are really, really good at walking you through the process. And often they'll come out for a consultation, and you could even hire them to help you look for how to lay out your trail. They're very willing and able, especially in Vermont. It's kind of a community of really nice people who want to just see good trails built. Yeah, they'd love you to hire them, but they're really willing to help. And you can find a good listing of those on the Professional Trail Builders website, or give me a call and I can give you some good recommendations. All right, so now that you've got your mapped out trail design, you've figured out all the structures you need, you've figured out exactly where you want this line to go, walk it a few more times. Walk it at different times of year. Make sure maybe you laid it out last spring. Things change. Things change quick in Vermont, especially if we've had a big storm. The hydrology in Vermont seems to change all the time. So you really want to make sure that you've walked your trail through several seasons, and then again, a couple of more times before you're starting construction. So once you are ready to do that, you're going to pin flag the line, especially if you're going to have other people help you. You don't want to rely on the fact that there's a general line on a map, or like you think that everybody knows where the trail is going to go. Getting it right the first time is important. So pin flags are a great tool for that. I typically, if I'm doing full bench construction, which we'll show you in a picture in a minute, I pin flag the top of where I want people to start digging the side slope. And then again, you might adjust as time goes on. I typically pin flag, I walk it, I pin flag, I walk it again, make sure nothing feels awkward. And once you've got the sort of trail feel, you'll be able to identify that pretty quickly. It's not necessarily a science, it's an art. So again, you want to make a plan, you want to have your map and get some details on it. So if you're going to be telling people you want to bridge here, you want them to know exactly where that bridge is going to be. Again, using flagging, so like just regular flagging and writing on the flagging exactly where you want things is really great. And also giving them a map if they need instructions about how to get to where they're going. So you want to also think about getting the right tools. So there are hand tools that you can get from your library in a lot of instances that are used for gardening typically, but you can also use them for trail construction. Sometimes if you need to purchase specialized tools, there's a great tools guide on the American Trails website. It goes through all the different types of tools, and there's even more out there, and everybody has their favorite when it comes to either brushing, which is removing vegetation, grubbing or digging, or constructing with rocks, different things. And those are all hand tools. There are mechanized tools and, things like chainsaws or other tools that you might also think about using depending on the type of experience that you want to have when you're building your trail. You can rent mechanized equipment from a lot of places, but again, you want to make sure you know how to use it or hire somebody who can show you how to use it. And then I really think that going from never having built a trail to building a trail requires an interim step of at least working on trails. So it's harder than it looks. It's not just cutting down trees and it requires a little bit of know-how, and I think you can get that yourself. It's not rocket science, it's rock science, but you can volunteer with a local trail crew very easily. There's always need for that, and they can teach you all the skills that you need. There's also workshops offered pretty regularly. The Green Mountain Club does them, the Appalachian Mountain Club does them, and other groups offer them as well. And you could learn it pretty quickly. It's not that hard, but it's good to get experience. And then you also want to get help. I mean, trail work done by yourself is kind of fun, but I like to work in at least a pair because you always have someone to help you, and kind of watch out for you. Can be dangerous. It's not, it's not nothing. You're out in the woods. You're using tools that are sharp. You want to make sure somebody at least knows where you are. But it's fun to work in a group. So get friends, neighbors, family. People will work for, pizza and beer, maybe. Or you could also work with a local trail organization, especially if you're thinking about offering it to the public. And again, you could always hire a professional trail crew and at least get a quote on that and figure out how much it would cost and if it's something you want to invest in. Okay, so now you're ready to start constructing your trail. And I think it's really important to have one person who really understands the full scope and vision. And we've been talking the whole time as if that's you, but it could be anybody really, as long as they know exactly what is supposed to happen and what the purpose of this trail is, and has a vision for all the different elements that go together. I can remember at every project that I've ever worked on, there's a moment when if you're the crew leader or whatever you are, person with that vision, you can see the whole thing. You're like, I see it. I see how it's all going to come together. And I know that we need to start with this project and then move to this one. And that way you can be directing people if you have help. And you can respond to things that change because guess what? You're out in the woods, weather changes, you're going to discover something you weren't predicting in your design, and being able to respond to those things means having a person who understands the full scope of everything you're trying to achieve out there. And even if it's just a half-mile little trail in your backyard, it's good to know that you have somebody who gets that the bridge needs to happen first because X, Y, and Z, because it has an impact on where you're going to go from there or whatever. Everything is tied together. So again, having that plan in place is really important. And then other tips I'm going to give you now have to do with the fact that we live in a mountainous state. It's pretty hilly and there's lots of water and there's always there's not always a lot of rocks, but there's usually rocks. There's usually a lot of roots. We have lots of trees. And so it's really important to think about going with the flow of the land and what that means. So trails have three types of impacts that can happen on them that you want to plan for and hopefully mitigate right from the very beginning. The first and most predictable is compaction. So if you're offering this as a place to go, people are going to step on it, and that compression of the soil causes an impact. It typically levels out at a certain point as long as you've taken the other two impacts into account. And you kind of end up with a pan or some kind of hardened trail surface that is pretty stable once the initial impact of the trail is done. So the other impact you need to think about is erosion, and that is defined as the transport of materials by water or wind. So basically what flows downhill goes downhill. So water loves to find the quickest route to downhill, and if your trail is it's going to flow down your trail, and it's going to take with it any and all available materials that it can carry with the force and speed that it has. We don't typically have wind erosion here in Vermont. Out in the desert, you worry about that a little bit more, but we don't see that typically. And then the other type of impact that you can see is displacement, and that could come from a really steep grade on a trail. So if the trail is really steep and people are walking up it or riding bikes up it or braking as they're going downhill on a bike, then you'll see this displacement of soil, and it happens with all the different types of trail uses that you could think of. So knowing that those three things are going to be looking to work against you from the beginning, you really want to, again, get back to your plan and have it laid out in a way that takes them into account. So the first thing to think about in most trail construction projects is the outslope. So you don't want your trail, and this is natural surface trails, non-motorized trails for the most part, with the exception of certain types of downhill mountain bike trails, but those I'm not really going to get into. You want to think about outsloping your trail slightly, so tipping it slightly away from the hillside so that water can flow across it. So if you have water that does hit the trail, it leaves the trail pretty quickly. And you can further help that water make its decision to leave the trail quickly through a process of creating grade reversals. So you want to allow the trail to kind of undulate. You want it to go uphill and downhill just slightly. It doesn't take much to get the water off the trail if you think about it. So just kind of giving these moments where the trail only has small stretches where the water can fall in it and travel down, and then the trail goes uphill a little bit, and right in that cup of the trail the water is going to leave the trail, and because you've created this outslope, it's going to do it in a really nice way. And some people call it surfing the hillside. I kind of like the idea of just going with the flow and giving that sort of curvilinear design to your trail. And it feels nicer too. If you've ever gone for a hike in the woods, it feels nice to kind of be on this trail that has a little bit of up and down to it. So another guidance you can use, again, it's really site specific, but you can use the half rule. So a trail's grade or the percent slope, so how steep it is, should not be any greater than half the grade of the hillside that it contours along. So if the slope of the hill the trail runs along is 16%, then the maximum grade of the trail should be no more than 8%. And that allows water to flow across the trail, off the trail, and continue down the slope. And it's important in gentle slopes, especially if you think about it, because if you're on this relatively flat landscape and then you've created a trail that's compacted, it's going to be the lowest point. So you have to give the water a place to go, even on a gentle hillside. And I'll even keep the grade lower than the half rule. So removing 2% from that, it won't hurt. So if your slope that you're running along is 16%, they recommend 8%. I think 6% is good. And you can have steeper stretches on trails. I mean, sometimes you can't avoid it. You have to have this like 15 or 20% grade, but you want those to be really short stretches that have water control at the top and at the bottom of them, so that that short stretch is really minimal. So the average grade of your trail should be no more than 10%. It's the most sustainable. It's, again, site specific, but it's a good rule of thumb. And if you're looking for a way to measure grade on your trail, there's lots of different ways you can do that. You can use what's called a clinometer. and you can learn how to use those pretty easily just by Googling it. They're kind of expensive, though. Something that I found that was really easy to do is go out with a partner and just do some straight up measuring tape, rise over run math. It's, middle school math. Anyone can do it. And it's very easy for anyone to do. So you'd have somebody stand uphill on these steeper stretches, especially where you'd be concerned about the grade, and you'd measure how much distance was between you, and basically just do your rise over run to get your percent or your grade. Something else to think about is your maximum sustainable grade. So that's the steepest grade. Like I was talking about those short stretches of steepness. Typical maximum grades can vary. You should figure it out from the beginning. You should sort of set yourself a limit. And it really does depend on the other types of things that you're dealing with. And I always think of them as kind of like the crux of your trail. So like maybe there's just something you can't avoid. Limit those from the very beginning. Everywhere else your trail is super mellow and super nice, but you got to get up and over this little ledgy bit, and you're kind of just forced to do it. And it's okay. It's an interesting part of your trail. Keep it short and sweet, and make sure that it's got a lot of structure and support around it if it needs it. So thanks for listening, and I hope this inspires you to think about how a trail could fit into your backyard and your backyard woods. There's a ton of resources out there, for everything from planning and design to construction, recommended trail standards, and I urge you to refer to them below. And if you do have any follow-up questions or want some more specific resources or funding resources, feel free to contact me. It's easy to find my contact information on the Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation website. And unless they change our state email address again, my name is Jessica Savage, and you can reach me at jessica.savage@vermont.gov. Thanks, and happy trails.